The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and welcome to one of our first assessment webinars, The Principle of an Effective Assessment, What Makes a Good Assessment. Firstly, thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us. I hope that you can all hear me okay and you can see the first of our presentation slides in front of you. We're joined today by presenter Katherine Fowler from NFER's Centre for Assessment. Katherine joined the Centre for Assessment in January 2013 and she's involved in a variety of projects within assessment, including text selection, item writing and producing teacher outputs for NFER's own suite of tests. Katherine is the lead researcher on NFER Test Suite 2 Mathematics and is leading on the development of the National Curriculum reading tests for use at the end of Key Stage 1. Teachers often ask the question, what makes a good assessment? We know that there are some key criteria that primary schools should consider when selecting their approaches to pupil tests, and this webinar aims to give you an insight into these criteria and how a reliable assessment can contribute to your judgments. Towards the end, Katherine will also talk to you about NFER's range of optional tests, NFER Test Suite 2, and how these can support your school in measuring pupil progress in years 3 to 5. The webinar should last around 20 to 25 minutes and we've got 10 minutes set aside to answer any questions you may have at the end of the presentation also. You should hopefully all be able to see our slides and you should be able to see a control panel on the right hand side of your screen. This is what will allow you to ask any questions or raise your hands throughout the webinar. We would ask that you keep any questions towards the end, but if there is anything you feel can't wait, then please do ask and we'll try to address it if possible. If you're having any trouble hearing Katherine or are experiencing technical issues you feel might be from our end, then also please do let us know by asking a question and typing into that question section on the control panel. We will email the slides out to you following the presentation, so anything you do see you will be able to access at a later date, which hopefully means you can sit back and enjoy the webinar rather than frantically taking notes. I think that's all from me, so I'll pass you over to Katherine now, who will take you through her presentation.
Great, thank you Heather for that, and good afternoon everybody. As Heather mentioned, if at any point you find that you can't hear me, just let us know and we will try and fix that as quickly as possible, but hopefully this will all run technically smoothly. So, to start with, a quick summary of what I'm going to be talking about today. In the wake of the removal of levels, schools have been re-evaluating their assessment policies and practice according to what best suits their school context. My intention today is to provide you with some information to help with that evaluation of your assessment practice. Mostly I'll be talking about what makes a good test, and then towards the end of this session I will also outline how NFER tests are developed and how they can support schools in measuring pupil attainment and progress. So if you decide you wish to use published tests, what should you consider? What makes a good test? The first thing is validity. In other words, do these tests assess what we want to measure? The validity of a test is really important because alongside other evidence such as work done in class, homework, things like that, teachers will draw conclusions about a pupil's attainment or progress based on test results. So when looking at published tests, you need to look for evidence that they're the underlying curriculum. The test should have been developed based on the new national curriculum that came in 2014. It should assess all the key skills that you would expect your pupils to know. It should be age appropriate in terms of contexts and language. It should have been written by people who have expertise in assessment and in the national curriculum. And it should have undergone a rigorous development process, for example, being reviewed by experts in the field, being trialled extensively with pupils. When considering validity, it's also important to consider what you intend to use a test for. Some tests are designed to provide formative information on particular topics, whereas others have been written to provide more summative information. If you wish to prepare pupils for end of key stage tests, for example, choose a test that has a very similar look and feel so that you're giving a realistic test-taking practice. Pupils don't always perform in a similar way if the format of the test is different. So online tests may not accurately indicate pupil performance on a pen and paper test, for example. Which doesn't mean that you can't use both. It's just that you need to be aware of the potential effects of using those different types of tests and just being certain with yourself why you're using them that way. Another vitally important feature of a good test is that it should provide reliable outcomes. In other words, it should provide accurate and consistent results. In order to do this, a test needs to be technically sound. The reliability of a test can be affected by, for example, ambiguously worded questions or biased questions, poor administration guidance, or an unclear mark scheme. The length of the test should also be appropriate. Short tests can be unreliable because they don't give you enough evidence. There's just not enough there to know how a pupil is performing, whereas very long tests can result in pupil errors due to fatigue. There's just too much, they just run out of steam. Effective quality assurance and extensive trialling with a large number of pupils enable test developers to minimize sources of error and to establish a test's reliability, so the extent to which that test is providing consistent results. As well as helping to ensure that tests are reliable, having a large sample trialling the materials allows tests to be nationally standardized. Usually this requires a minimum of around 1,200 pupils per test across a nationally representative range of schools, representing, for example, different regions, different types of school, and different school performance bands. Larger samples will give more accurate standardized scores, which I'll come on to in a minute, because these will have been calculated on a larger number of pupils. It's really important to use tests that have been standardized at an appropriate time. Because there have been substantial changes to the curriculum in England recently, tests that claim to give outcomes relating to attainment on that new 2014 curriculum should have been trialled with pupils who have been taught that new content for at least a year. So the trial should not have happened before the end of the 2014-15 school year. And one other benefit of a standardized test is that it allows for standardized scores. Standardized scores allow you to easily see whether a pupil is above or below the average of all the pupils that took the test, and also to benchmark individual pupil performance or class performance against national averages. You can also have age standardized scores, which allow you to compare an individual's performance with other pupils of the same age. And these scores can be really useful, particularly for putting the performance of younger pupils into context. Some published tests can provide additional useful features. I'm going to mention two here really briefly and then come back to them in more detail in a little bit. So one of them is measures of progression. Measures of progression in a suite can help you to track pupil progress over time, for example, within a year or from year to year. And then secondly, outcomes that describe how a pupil's performance compares against a set of predetermined criteria or learning standards. These criterion-referenced outcomes are generally based on expert opinion about what a pupil might be expected to know and do at a particular age in a particular subject. So to use a slightly outdated example now, some tests could provide an outcome that compares a pupil's score to levels in the old national curriculum, or these days to the age-related expectations given in the new national curriculum. And as I mentioned, I'll go into these a bit more in a little bit. So we currently have two suites of tests here in the NFER. I just want to talk a bit now about what we offer for schools in terms of measuring attainment and progress. I'll just explain a little bit now about what is available and explain how you can use them next. So we have the two suites, as I mentioned, in reading, mathematics, grammar and punctuation, and also a suite of 3 spelling tests. And these can be used in the summer and autumn terms. And I'll explain that a bit more on the next slide. All of our assessments are fully aligned to the new national curriculum that came in 2014 and have been trialled with a large number of pupils who have been taught that curriculum for at least a year. They have also been developed by our team of in-house assessment experts who are all experienced in the development of the national curriculum key stage tests, as well as a range of other assessment materials. All of our assessments have undergone a process of rigorous review by experts in the field and have all been trialled with over 1,200 pupils. So this diagram just shows in another way what products we offer and also how we recommend schools use our range of assessments for years 3 to 5. As I mentioned on the previous slide, we have 2 sets of mathematics, reading, grammar and punctuation tests, and then the set of 3 spelling tests for each year group. For schools who only want one set of tests, the summer set can be used in the second half of the year from March to July to provide a summative assessment of how the pupils have done over that school year. Schools also have the opportunity, if they wish, to use the autumn set of tests in the first half of the school year, so from September to February time. And these can then be used alongside the summer term suite to measure progress within a year, as well as being formative assessments in their own right. The 3 spelling tests are slightly different and they can be used at any point in the school year, and this diagram just provides some ideas for how to time the administration. So this slide just gives you a little glimpse of what these tests actually look like. On the left, the pink ones are the maths tests, and this is an example test from each year, but each year comes with a set of 3 test booklets, including an arithmetic paper, which mirrors what you would see in the national curriculum tests at the end of Key Stage 2. The mathematics tests also come with a comprehensive teacher guide and mark scheme. The pictures on the right-hand side are the readers for the reading test, and these are again very similar to the national curriculum key stage tests that you would see. Each year has a reading booklet that's made up of 3 different texts which are unthemed. They also get a reading answer booklet for each year and again a comprehensive teacher guide. And then they're not pictured here, but the grammar and punctuation tests have 1 answer book per year and a comprehensive teacher guide which also includes some formative assessment guidance. And similarly with the spelling, you get the 3 tests and the teacher guidance with the formative assessment guidance in there as well. So what are the key features of NFER tests? The teacher guidance for all the assessments will provide standardized and age standardized scores, which allow teachers to see how pupils are performing compared to a large nationally representative sample. All schools who use NFER tests are also given access to a range of electronic tools which provide further information about pupil performance, including question level information which can be used to see how individual pupils and the class as a whole or on particular subsets of skills, which can then be used to highlight particular strengths and weaknesses. The summer term suite of tests for reading and mathematics also provides information about whether pupils are reaching the age-related expectations set out in the new national curriculum. And finally, we will be providing schools with a means of measuring progress within and between years using those standardised scores. And I should also mention that we do have an optional analysis and marking service which we can offer to schools as well. So in the next few slides, I'm going to expand on how NFER tests will be able to be used to measure pupil progress and how also they can be used to contribute to judgments about the age-related expectations embedded in the national curriculum. So in terms of measuring progress, we're currently working to provide a measure of progress across years and within years for grammar and punctuation, reading and maths. Data collected from the extensive trialling will be combined with live data from schools currently using our tests, and that all together will be analysed to provide a measure of progress. By using both trial and live data, we'll have access to a very large pool of data to provide schools with that most reliable measure. And this diagram just sort of shows in a more visual format how that progress measure is going to work. So within each year group, you'll be able to measure progress from the first half of term, the autumn term, through to the end of the year in the summer term for years 3, 4 and 5. And then using those summer term tests, you'll be able to measure progress from the end of one year to another, so year 3 to year 4 and year 4 to year 5. And this diagram's been taken straight out of one of our reading teacher guides, hence why it says reading there, but it would be exactly the same for the maths and for the grammar and punctuation as well. And as well as measuring progress over time using those standardised scores, NFER tests can inform decisions as to whether pupils are meeting age-related expectations. With the removal of levels from the national curriculum, we arranged a large-scale standard-setting exercise here with over 100 teachers who gave their expert opinions on the demands of the new summer term tests in relation to the new national curriculum. In particular, they looked at pupils on the threshold of working at the expected level and also on the threshold of really exceeding expectations. By working with these expert teachers, it's allowed us to indicate a range of marks within which we believe the threshold for meeting those age-related expectations is to be found, and also a band which indicates high achievement. And it's really important to say here that NFER tests, or indeed any test, is just one piece of evidence that teachers can use. And the results of the tests alone should not be the be-all and end-all of deciding how a pupil is doing. Their results should be combined with other evidence to inform any decisions. So again, another one of my diagrams. This just shows these different score bands for age-related expectations. Again, this has been taken from the Year 5 Reading Summer Term Teacher Guide, but the maths will be looking incredibly similar to this. So in this reading example, the evidence of our expert teachers has suggested that children scoring 22 or more on the test are achieving age-related expectations. However, as you can see, there is an overlap in the score ranges, and that is to really emphasize the point that these outcomes should inform rather than determine any teacher decisions. There are several reasons why we don't recommend using tests as your only piece of evidence when making decisions about a child. For example, written tests cannot cover every aspect of the national curriculum. for example, reading fluency or range of reading for reading, or things like certain elements of geometry and estimation in maths, which are just very difficult to assess in a pen and paper context. Also, some pupils may just perform better in formal assessments than in day-to-day work, and vice versa. Some pupils will struggle in tests when you, as teachers, will know that they are perfectly capable of that particular skill. So teachers should always consider the overall performance of pupils, particularly for those who score in those little overlap brackets, before deciding whether pupils have met the age-related expectations or are exceeding them indeed. Okay, so this is the last slide for me now, and it's just a little summary of what I've spoken about this afternoon. If you do decide to use any externally produced tests, it's really important to check that they are fit for purpose, reliable and valid. And I hope that this presentation has helped a bit to know what to look out for in that sense. Also, I've just put a link down here at the bottom. Don't worry about scribbling it down or anything like that. All these slides will be emailed to you after this webinar. It's just a really useful report from the Commission on Assessment Without Levels, which provides a host of recommendations to schools about assessment policy and practice, and it's just a really useful guide, so I just wanted to pop that in at the end there. And that is it from me, unless you have any questions. Thank you.
So thank you, Katherine. So we've got a bit of time still set aside for questions. We have the ability with the GoToWebinar software for you to ask questions via the control panel. You'll see you've got a little questions tab there, so you can write your question in and we'll be able to view it. It will only be Katherine and myself that can view the questions, nobody else on the webinar, but I will read them out loud in order for Katherine to answer them. So we'll just give you a couple of moments to ask any questions you've got. Just to let you know that the slides will be emailed out to you, as I mentioned. We will send these out along with a recording of the webinar so that you can go back and reference anything. There's also some contact details on there. If you go away, you've got any questions afterwards, then you can get in touch with us. Questions about assessment, Katherine's kindly shared her email address there, so you can direct any assessment questions at her. At NFER, we've also got a dedicated inquiry line, so there's a number there and an email address. If you do have any questions about NFER tests or just anything NFER in general. So we've probably got time just for a couple of questions. Let me bear with me and see if we've got one. So we've got a question. Somebody's asked what's the difference between standardised and age standardised scores, and before I pass that over to Katherine, I'll just let you know as well we do have another webinar on the 23rd of November at 4 p.m. which goes into detail on this question. I'll send the link through to everybody when we send the slides, but I'll let Katherine just answer very quickly in the meantime.
Also, I don't think I unmuted myself there. Thank you, Heather. So standardised and age standardised scores, they are very, very similar. The main difference is the standardised score is a way of comparing all pupils on the same test, but it doesn't take into consideration age at all. So we know, particularly in primary schools, that the summer-born children tend to, not always, but they do tend to perform not quite as well as their older peers. And with a standardized score, you will see that. You'll see that their scores are slightly below the older pupils. Whereas age standardized scores, the age of a pupil is taken into account, and you look, when you see the score, it will only be in comparison to other pupils of that exact same age. So it basically, the age standardized score mediates the difference in age. When in your primary school, year 3 to 5, that year difference can be a big difference. So it should make things a little bit more accurate for those summer-born pupils, and you get a more realistic measure of their ability, if that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. Thank you.
So we've had quite a few questions through actually, so we'll try and get through a few more, and then if we don't respond to any of the questions, then we will follow up afterwards, and Katherine or myself can get back to you personally just to make sure that we've answered the questions. So we've got another one. Can you clarify the distinction between validity and reliability?
That is a really great question. Thanks, Heather, again. So the difference is, and it is a really hard one to get, I find it quite hard to get my head around this. Validity is whether a test is measuring what it claims to. So for example, if you say a test is a maths test, but all it's actually asking is for you to do mental maths or just do arithmetic, then it's not a valid maths test, it's a valid arithmetic test, it's a valid mental maths test. It's making sure that what the test claims to be testing really is what it's testing. Reliability is more about whether if you had that same child take the test 3 times in a row in a hypothetical situation, would they get the same mark each time? Or is there something else about the test? For example, is the question really confusing? Is it just too long a test, so one day they're more tired, one day they're more awake and they get further, which is affecting the results. So it's whether, it's quite a difficult thing to get my head around as well, but it's whether that test is an accurate test. Is it, I'm trying to get my words out here, is it going to have the same result every time? Again, I hope that makes sense.
Thank you. And we've had a question about the possibility of having a trial pack, but that's probably a question more for our inquiry line actually, rather than Katherine. So, I'll ask them to get back to the person that's asked that, so we can respond accurately with that. So we've got one more question. So, do NFER offer anything for the spring term?
So at the moment, obviously we have the autumn and the summer term. We are looking into spring term tests as we speak. We don't know for certain that we'll be doing the spring term, but we are very much hoping that there will be that third suite of tests so that we can have progress throughout a year termly.
Lovely. And then why are the age-related expectations only available in the summer term tests?
So the summer term tests are intended to be much more summative. You've got pupils who've been through the entire year. They should have covered the entire curriculum at that stage, and therefore we can say we can look at their results and say whether they're at the age-related expectation or not. The autumn term tests are intended to be much more formative. We know they won't have done everything at that stage, so it seems unfair at that point to try and work out whether or not they're at the level that they're meant to be, because they are very much still learning that year's curriculum, and that's why it's only in the summer term test.
Lovely, thank you, Katherine. So we've just reached 4 o'clock, so I think if we stop there, because we said we'd finish within the half an hour, there's quite a few questions, actually more than I expected, so that's great, lovely that everybody's really engaged and listening. So any questions we haven't answered, we will follow up with those. Also, already mentioned twice, we'll send the slides, we'll send a recording, and just quickly, I will send the link in that follow-up email to our next webinar, which is on the 23rd of November, which covers the difference between age standardised and scaled scores. I know that's quite an interesting subject for teachers. So thank you very much for joining today. We hope that you found it helpful, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.